Welcome all. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have everybody here for this special event with Metagenics and Fullscript/Emerson. Excellent. I am Amy Regan from Emerson Ecologics, and I am so glad you joined us today. A few housekeeping notes. Please place all questions you have in the Q&A box for the questions and answer session at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be sent via email to all attendees and registrants, and there's also a copy of the presentation slides in the handout section. It is my pleasure to introduce Malisa M. Carullo. Malisa M. Carullo completed her doctorate in naturopathic medicine at National University of Health Sciences in Chicago, Illinois. She completed her MSc in biology at the University of Ottawa with an emphasis on genetics and molecular evolution. Malisa puts much focus on biological medicine and its treatment of chronic diseases, as well as healthy age management. Her practice interests include endocrinology, chronic infections, and blending naturopathic medicine and sports medicine. She is currently working as a clinical affairs liaison at Metagenics. Excellent. You are good to go, Malisa. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Amy. Let me just get situated here myself. So thanks for the beautiful introduction. And thanks to everyone as well for just being on the webinar today. Whether you're joining us live or you're going to listen later, I really hope you enjoy the webinar. And following the webinar, our objectives for today is to be able to understand what makes medical foods unique. Really just to understand how certain therapeutic combinations can help nutritionally manage disease and improve health overall for individuals. And then finally, to understand protocols and outcomes associated with utilizing the specific medical food formulas. Okay, so let's begin by looking at just a little bit of history of medical foods. Sorry, I'm just trying to get oriented with the clicker and advancing the slides here. So medical foods are not regular foods. They are orally administered dietary products, and they're formulated for the management of a specific disease state or condition for which specific nutritional requirements have been established. So in other words, the ingredients included in a medical food must meet distinct nutritional requirements for the disease being treated. They are not simply recommended to just manage symptoms or reduce risks of a disease or condition. They differ from protein powders or functional foods because all efficacy claims for medical foods must be based on clinical data. And then finally, because the ingredients in the medical foods must have clinical research supporting their use, this is a separate category regulated by the FDA. So I know this could be quite confusing to hear it for the first time, so I'm happy to answer or clarify any questions surrounding a medical food at the end of the presentation. Okay, so let's begin by looking at the glucose response, a normal glucose response. So when the body is functioning optimally, there are multiple sites engaged in order to keep the blood sugar in balance and stable. Normally, when blood glucose levels rise, that could be most likely following a meal, the pancreas is going to produce insulin and target both the muscle and liver to absorb the glucose and store it as glycogen. When blood glucose is low, so this could be during exercise, the brain and pancreas sense the low glucose. So the brain is going to trigger the hunger response, and the pancreas is going to stimulate the release of glycogen from the liver and muscle to produce glucose. Leptin, this is a hormone secreted by adipose tissue in a process dependent on insulin. So the amount of circulating leptin in the plasma is directly proportional to the body fat content. So increased leptin levels in the blood signal to the brain that there's enough energy storage and that it has to stop eating and burn more energy. So leptin and insulin seem to work together to inhibit food intake and increase energy expenditure. So there are many factors that will modulate and contribute to changes in glucose metabolism. So for instance, reduced insulin signaling. This could be seen with type 2 diabetics. the insulin receptors lose their sensitivity to insulin. So they're either not binding insulin, or if it does bind insulin, those receptors might not be working optimally. With time, this hyperglycemic state is going to prevail, and that's because the sugar cannot move into the cells. Another example would be food and lifestyle factors. These can contribute to changes in glucose metabolism. And obesity is often associated with these chronic low leptin activity. So this can trick the brain into thinking that the body is always starved. Again, over time, this leads to overeating and excessive energy storage as fats. So what we're seeing is that there's a dysregulation of feeding behaviors and energy metabolism. So concerns with glucose metabolism and these factors modulating glucose metabolism are a progressive problem. They can begin anywhere from 5 to 10 years before any signs or symptoms will surface. As individuals neglect their health or factors contributing to their health, we see a decline in organ function. So maybe the pancreas becomes more sluggish, or the liver is just overwhelmed. The graph on the slide is really just showing us this decline in the glucose metabolism. So when insulin begins to stay elevated, resistance is going to ensue, and both glucose metabolism and beta cell function will decline. So maintaining stable blood sugar levels is going to be critical for health overall. It's critical for energy, inflammation, muscle mass, even our stress response and the sleep patterns. And because the progression of pathophysiology could take years, you can imagine why some of the first signs or symptoms that arise might be indirectly related to glucose metabolism, such as waking in the night or anxiety. Metagenics really is an industry leader in the development of medical foods. The well-designed formulas are second to none, in my opinion. They're an integral part of my own practice, my private practice. And one of the main reasons I use them so often is because they contain nutrients at a level that's really going to be difficult for patients to obtain from foods alone. These nutrients also have the ability to modify and regulate cellular communication quickly in individuals with chronic illness. So as we go through the formulas, there might be a little bit more mechanistic info than most of you need to know or memorize, but I think it's important to really understand some of the biochemistry to unravel the pathology that you're attempting to improve in your patients. So the first formula we're going to look at is ultra glucose control. This is a formula that was designed in conjunction with the Joslin Diabetes Center to manage and improve an individual's glucose response. The Joslin Diabetes Center is affiliated with Harvard University and is the world's largest diabetes research center and clinic. This unique formula is for individuals who may need just additional assistance in controlling their glucose response. And in order to do that, it will help to curb their hunger and sustain their energy between and after meals. The formula contains 20 essential vitamins and minerals. There's a complete profile of protein profile and a few key ingredients that we'll review in the next few slides. So ultra glucose control delivers a balanced ratio of macronutrients. It's consistent with the guidelines of the Joslin Diabetes Center, which is 40% carbohydrates, 30% protein, and 30% fat. This ratio also matches the Mediterranean diet, which is the most widely studied diet for cardiometabolic disease management. The best macronutrient composition to treat cardiovascular disease or cardiometabolic disease has been debated for quite some time, but there's quite a bit of evidence looking at the macronutrient composition, showing that a modest increase in dietary protein is a better option when blood sugar control is the goal that you're trying to achieve. So protein content does not increase plasma glucose as a lot of individuals think. It increases insulin response and results in significant reductions in hemoglobin A1C. A slight increase in protein can also help with weight reduction, improve blood pressure, and markers of inflammation. So this formula contains a combo of intact pea and rice protein with added branched chain and essential amino acids. So the most fascinating ingredient in this formula is going to be the complex carbohydrate that's included. This contains UCAN starch. It's a super starch. It's a slow-release waxy maize starch that digests slowly to support and maintain a sustained glucose response. UCAN is fully absorbed and minimally stimulates insulin. The inspiration behind this ingredient is it was a young boy born with glycogen storage disease. And these individuals typically, they can't break down glycogen. So in order to avoid very low dips in their blood sugar, eating every few hours is necessary. So that means, even throughout the night. So as a young infant, parents would have to wake them to feed. This slow release carb allows those with such similar genetic alterations to just avoid these drastic dips in blood sugar and obtain a full night's sleep. So for those of you that are familiar with UCAN, if you've heard of it, it's probably because of the application for athletes. The superstarch exerts a very low osmotic pressure in the GI tract, and that's because it has a high molecular weight. So when you combine this feature with the minimal changes in blood sugar and then the additional macro and micronutrients, this makes the formula a top choice for sports nutrition. So think of elite athletes specifically when training. You can think of weekend warriors. Another application would be long distance runners or cyclists. They can really avoid gut rot symptoms that they would otherwise get with the common energy packs they use. I especially like to use this formula for those who are busy and tend to skip meals. I use it myself. And then you all as practitioners are a great example. So how many times do we run into our lunch hours seeing patients, right? This is a fabulous addition to just combat the yo-yo glucose response in reactive hypoglycemics. So the application of the formula was tested at the Joslin Diabetes Center. And what we're looking at here is a poster presentation of a randomized control trial evaluating 3 nutrition therapy models on hemoglobin A1C and body weight. This was in 108 overweight and obese type 2 diabetic patients over a 16-week period. So patients were randomized to one of 3 groups, and each group met with a registered dietitian, but Group A received an individualized diet plan based on standard guidelines. Group B followed a structured diet plan, which included menu books. They kept a food log, and they were given 2 servings of the ultra glucose control. Group C received everything I just mentioned for Group B, in addition to weekly phone calls by a dietitian. So on this bar graph, the blue bars represent Group A, and the red bars represent Group B and C together. On the left, the graph is comparing hemoglobin A1C, and the bar graph on the right represents changes in body weight. And you can see that groups B and C, which were those with an individualized diet plan and the ultra glucose control consumption, they both had significant decreases in hemoglobin A1C and body weight when compared to Group A. Group A had very little to no change over the 16-week period. So in the second study, this was an open label 3-way crossover randomized study, also conducted at the Joslin Diabetes Center. Here, postprandial plasma glucose, insulin, and GLP levels were compared in 22 diabetics following the ingestion of either ultra glucose control, oatmeal, or glucerna at 3 separate times over a 3-week period. So at each visit, subjects had been fasting overnight and then were served one of the 3 products. The first graph we're looking at here is representing insulin response. So both ultra glucose control, that's represented by the orange line, and glucerna, which is the green line, they produce higher insulin secretion following consumption when compared to oatmeal, which is the blue line. So the higher insulin secretion was most likely due to the protein content of the 2 formulas. It does demonstrate that protein intake increases postprandial insulin levels during the early phase of secretion. And this early phase, this early response, it's usually reduced or even lost in type 2 diabetic patients. But it really is essential to achieve a reduction overall in postprandial glucose levels. So we see this increased secretion lasting about 90 minutes for ultra glucose control and 30 minutes or so following consumption of Glucerna. The differences among these two formulas are really the amino acid profiles. So recall that additional essential amino acids and branch chains were added to ultra glucose control. And of the amino acids, leucine and phenylalanine in this case would have the highest insulin effects, so insulinotropic effects. So again, just really a plug for knowing what your formula contains and how it works mechanistically. So to say a formula has a complete amino acid profile, it's just not enough. How much of each of these amino acids the formula contains is really important because we're going to see that we need certain ones in different dosages for therapeutic effects. So this graph is taking a closer look at GLP-1 levels following the ingestion of the three products. GLP secretion is directly related to the carbohydrate and fat content of a substance. So lower postprandial GLP-1 levels are also commonly seen among type 2 diabetics, which is one reason why increasing GLP levels has become the target for many pharmaceutical companies in order to treat diabetics. You'll notice that the GLP levels increased following ingestion of UGC and Glucerna, once again, compared to oatmeal. And this is really believed to have occurred because, again, that macronutrient profile. We see that there was a higher spike in following ingestion of Glucerna, and this in particular is most likely due to a higher monounsaturated fat content in Glucerna. So much like the insulin response, you're going to see a quicker decline in GLP levels with Glucerna than you do with ultra glucose control. So just a quick slide on GLP-1, since this peptide has been receiving much attention lately. GLP-1 is going to suppress appetite by a couple mechanisms. One of them is the mechanoreceptors in the enteric nervous system that cause gut distension. And then the second would be the hypothalamic mechanisms that tell the brain that the stomach is full. So again, research demonstrates that these mechanisms are blunted in those with diabetes. So pharmaceuticals that target GLP-1 do cause side effects. They could cause nausea, vomiting, and maybe gastroparesis with time. So for those that are willing to commit to really making lifestyle changes, commit to a long-term approach, ultra glucose control is really a great option. It might also be something to consider for those already on medication for diabetes, so in hopes of maybe eventually weaning off. The next medical food we're going to look at was formulated for chronic gastroinflammatory conditions. But really, whatever your practice focus is, this formula, I'm sure, is going to be relevant because essentially so many patients we see have some kind of underlying uncontrolled inflammation that could be the cause or contributing factor to the disease state or condition at hand. So Ultra inflamx 360 is a medical food formulated to manage chronic inflammatory conditions. The formula contains a macronutrient profile, once again with pea and rice protein, plus the addition of branch chain and essential amino acids. There are over 20 micronutrients, plus key ingredients that we're going to review in the next few slides that help modulate the inflammatory response. So just bear with me as I quickly review some of these mechanisms that are involved in inflammation, because I think this will be helpful to demonstrate where and how the bioactives are targeting inflammation in this formula. So recall that pain and inflammation can be the result of a few pathways, one of them being the arachidonic acid pathway. When this is upregulated, it has the ability to form prostaglandins via the COX enzymes and or chemokines via 5-LOX. So this is one system that will drive inflammation initiation, and it can enhance vasodilation and may contribute to pain overall. So another inflammatory mechanism involved is nuclear factor kappa B. So NF-kappa B is a transcription factor, meaning it can migrate into a cell's nucleus and increase the expression of inflammatory cytokines at the genetic level. So these cytokines, such as tumor necrosis factor alpha, can in turn activate NF-kappa B as well. So from the very basic diagram you're seeing on the slide, you can see how this is a vicious cycle that persists. This slide is just really demonstrating how these pro-inflammatory cytokines can alter gene expression. So here you're seeing tumor necrosis factor alpha binding to the receptor and activating NF-kappa B, which will then make its way into the cell nucleus, promoting pro-inflammatory gene expression via transcription. So being able to modulate these pro-inflammatory cytokines from multiple angles would be advantageous when treating any chronic inflammatory conditions. So let's just look at a few plant bioactives that are known to modulate inflammation initiation. Curcuminoids have a strong history of therapeutic use. There's much clinical and preclinical data available showing its therapeutic use and the effects in humans. I'm sure most of you are already using some source of curcumin with your patients in practice. But with all the fabulous medicinal properties that curcumin can offer, the challenge really is intestinal absorption. It's just poorly absorbed in humans. So this is often the case with many phytonutrients. It's the bioavailability overall. So when curcumin is combined with galactomannan fibers from fenugreek, it's been shown to have increased absorption of curcuminoids in the bloodstream. And we call this combination curcuma-galactomannoside, or CGM for short. And here we see human data demonstrating the enhanced bioavailability of CGM. So subjects were given either standard curcumin, shown in blue, or CGM, shown in red. And what you're looking at are total free circulating curcuminoids following the ingestion of both CGM and standard curcumin. So plasma concentrations were measured at various time points, and you could see that standard curcuminoids are almost non-existent in circulation. When we compare them with CGM, we see much higher amounts with sharp increases around the 1 hour mark and the 12-hour mark. Xanthohumol is a polyphenol. It's found in hops, and it's definitely well known for its use to flavor and preserve beer, but it does have many additional therapeutic uses, such as it's a potent antioxidant and many anti-inflammatory properties. So also from the last bullet point, you could see there's some nice human clinical data demonstrating xanthohumol's ability to reduce DNA damage at just 13 milligrams per day. And a lot of the references are listed on the slide if you wanted to pull some of that research and take a closer look. But like curcumin, xanthohumol is just not well absorbed. So luckily, there is a technology available to increase its bioavailability. It is the creation of what we call XNT promatrix. So it's a protein matrix to surround the hops. And the graph on this slide is just demonstrating the increase in plasma xanthohumol seen when a standard hops preparation, that is the red line, is compared with the hops protein matrix, the black line. So again, over time, much more xanthohumol is present when delivered as the matrix form. Okay, just really quickly, ginger root contains many constituents to modulate inflammation as well. We see antioxidant effects, analgesic properties with its use, anti-inflammatory. But this slide is really what we want to look at and just focus on. This really sums up how mechanistically the plant-based compounds we just chatted about would impact inflammation initiation overall. We can see here the bioactives have the ability to modulate at every step downstream of arachidonic release from the lipid bilayer. So these bioactives, curcumin, ginger, xanthohumol, they're going to be key ingredients that are included in the Ultra inflamx 360. Here we can see where the bioactives will impact inflammatory cytokines and then the signaling pathways within the cell as well. So again, worth mentioning is that the NF-kappa B has the ability to translocate into the nucleus of the cell. And so if we can modulate this NF-kappa B, we're going to ultimately alter what is being expressed genetically. So that's going to contribute to both local and systemic inflammation. And you can probably see at this point why the formula would be quite useful beyond those with chronic GI inflammatory conditions. So we want to think about autoimmune patients or when we're trying to manage pain in patients. So this should be a staple product for those protocols. And then from there, you can just build on top of it. You can add 1 or 2 additional supplements that's targeted for that specific patient. So in conjunction with National University of Natural Medicine, the Naturopathic School in Portland, Metagenics was able to test the formula in 10 adults with Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. Individuals were given 2 servings of Ultra inflamx 360 for 3 months, and the results showed an excellent compliance from all the participants. So 98% of the requested servings were ingested. And, a quick comment from my personal experience is that often those patients that need the medical food the most will crave it after 5 to 7 days of continuous use, which is just interesting to note in practice. I'm sure others that use medical foods in practice have experienced the same thing. So statistically significant increases in levels of both folate and B12 were noted, and decreases in tumor necrosis factor alpha and red blood cell distribution width were also noted. The third formula we're going to take a peek at is Ultramil Cardio 360. This is used primarily in those that fall under the cardiovascular health umbrella. So I really like this picture, mostly because I'm a visual learner, but also because it sums up so many mechanisms really well. We're looking at a normal or healthy blood vessel in the top left of the picture. And as we work our way across to the right, you can see the progression of endothelial dysfunctions. So the blood vessel becomes more and more narrow, and the possibility of blood clot is present. The bottom half of the diagram, this really just reminds us that major modifiable factors contribute to the development of atherosclerosis. So many of these factors are the same as those we saw with blood sugar management. They can include unhealthy diet, maybe exposure to cigarette smoke or other toxicants, excess inflammation, etc. So for individuals that present with elevated lipids or perhaps hypertension, Ultramil Cardio 360 can be quite useful for these patient populations. It contains a complete micro and macronutrient profile to support metabolic function. There is soluble fiber to promote the reduction in LDL. The hops protein matrix we saw in Ultra inflamx 360 to decrease inflammation markers. This is added here as well. And again, the idea is really just to support multiple pathways in the body that are going to impact cholesterol levels overall, and to help nutritionally manage blood lipids. But at the same time, we're reducing what could be the progression to more serious health concerns. The only ingredient listed here that we haven't discussed thus far is the reticol, which is a phytosterol. So let's just take a peek at that on the next slide. So reticol is a soy-free plant sterol. This has been shown to reduce LDL by 24% in just 30 days when combined with diet intervention. So remember that because phytosterols look and act like cholesterol, they're going to compete for absorption by the digestive system. So when plant sterols are digested, instead of cholesterol, the cholesterol is removed as waste. So the graph on the slide is showing that reduction of LDL cholesterol after 1,700 milligrams of the radicals ingested compared to controls. Okay, so moving on, the next medical food is going to address the malabsorption and dysbiosis that often results from a compromised gastrointestinal system. And there are many patient populations that would benefit from intestinal support and modulation of their flora. But specifically, we're going to focus on a few groups. We're going to focus on those with irritable bowel syndrome. So these patients may have a wide variety of symptoms, but what they have in common is abdominal pain and altered bowel habits. Many factors can definitely contribute and cause IBS, but those important to this medical food in particular would be alterations in motility, gut flora, and visceral perception. Celiac disease, this is included here as well due to the microscopic changes in the small intestine. This patient population would be at risk for having many nutrient deficiencies, and long-term progression of those deficiencies can lead to muscle loss, neurological damage, and bone loss. Inflammatory bowel disease patients, again, this could be ulcerative colitis or maybe Crohn's disease patients. They may have symptoms, quite severe that it would impact their quality of life. Some of these patients, if their disease has progressed and if they're at a young age, they may even just miss, a lot of time at school or need to be homeschooled. So alterations in intestinal permeability, alterations in flora, and nutrient deficiencies are quite common amongst these patients. And then lastly, those in the other GI dysfunction category could be, those who might have a portion of their intestine surgically removed. So here we would be concerned with nutrient deficiencies once again. Okay, so the medical food formula we're focusing on here is called Ultra GI Replenish. And again, what we see is the ingredients included would provide many of the components one would often recommend for addressing malabsorption and dysbiosis. So macronutrients and micronutrients are included. The protein would be especially important for those that may be at risk for sarcopenia. So that could be like a celiac patient or someone with IBD. Micronutrients such as B vitamins and iron might be very important for some of these individuals. Amino acids, nutrients, and antioxidants to support intestinal integrity are included. And then also prebiotics to target the dysbiosis that might be present. This formula contains 2 types of prebiotics, isomaltoligosaccharides, and 2 fucosyllactose, which we'll learn about in a few slides to come. So I mentioned that Ultra GI Replenish contains protein, but more specifically, again, it's the intact rice and pea protein with the addition of single amino acids and a dipeptide form of glutamine, which you are seeing here on the slide. So it's L-alanyl L-glutamine. So remember that glutamine is a conditionally essential amino acid, and it's a good idea to supplement this with this amino acid because it's the preferred substrate for enterocytes. So many of you listening, you all know these facts about glutamine, that glutamine can help with the immune cells. It helps to maintain the integrity of the mucosa and really just limit the translocation of bacteria into circulation. But often what we forget is that there's other nutrients that could support the mucosa. There's other functions of glutamine, and then there's synergistic nutrients as well. So alanine is a non-essential amino acid, but what both alanine and glutamine have in common is that they play a role in hydration. So L-alanine is going to increase the concentration of potassium within the cells. That's going to help draw water in. And then glutamine is going to be used to metabolize any ammonia present. So that might affect the pH balance of the body overall. And then ultimately water balance as well. So in addition to this mechanism, there is a synergistic action on glucose transport. So alanine is involved in gluconeogenesis pathway, and glutamine enhances glucose uptake into cells by stimulating GLP-1, and then subsequently insulin release. So I mentioned this really because we've already talked about ultra glucose control, and I just want to put a plug in there so you could see how improving gut health will improve glucose response and vice versa. Again, these aren't separate entities. Everything is a domino effect, and it affects one another. So when these two amino acids are combined, they're a power duo. So I mentioned that there were 2 prebiotics included in the formula, isomaltoligosaccharides and then 2'-fucosolactose. IMOs, also isomaltoligosaccharides, they are a common ingredient in many supplements, and they're known to really help boost the fiber content in a formula. They can stimulate the growth of bifidobacteria, promote short-chain fatty acids, and have the ability to inhibit growth of harmful bacteria. It's the 2'-fucosolactose, or we'll call it 2FL. This ingredient might be new to some of you. 2FL is a human milk oligosaccharide, and it is naturally occurring in human breast milk. So if we think about the macronutrients a nursing infant receives, much of that breakdown comes from the single carbohydrate lactose, and that's because it is easily digested by an infant. But infants also need to feed and colonize their new GI tract. Because human breast milk does not contain fiber, the milk oligosaccharides, or the HMO, are what act as a soluble fiber. The 2FL is also bifidogenic, so this means it will support the growth of bifidobacteria. And 2FL is directly responsible for the increase in bifido colonization that we see in breastfed babies. So from the slide, you can see, the little amount of oligosaccharide that's present in cow's milk. And again, cow's milk is a common base used in many formula-fed babies. One of the reasons why the microbiome of these formula-fed infants lacks diversity is partially due to the lack of HMO or oligosaccharides producing bifidobacteria. Okay, so I'm just going to bring up again that point that 2FL is bifidogenic. Here we have some strains and species of bifidobacteria that digest 2FL. They contain special genes that humans don't have to break down HMOs. So bifido use HMO as food, and then they also have this growth advantage compared to other bacteria in the GI tract that can't consume HMO. So they're very special in that they can consume this HMO. Once 2FL is metabolized, it does produce short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, and acetate as byproducts. Butyrate, we know, is important for many functions. This could be beneficial to the patient population with malabsorption or compromised gut function because of the intestinal permeability concepts here. So it can regulate intestinal permeability and the growth of the intestinal cells. It is also involved in water and electrolyte absorption. So again, hand in hand with the alanine and glutamine dipeptide we discussed. But we also need butyrate to regulate motility. So this will affect how frequently a patient has to use the restroom. And for visceral perception is very important for those who have abdominal pain. Butyrate can also assist in the regulation of NF-kappa B. That's a central regulator of intestinal and systemic inflammation. So recall, we just looked at that mechanism when we discussed Ultra inflamx 360, and we looked at those summary slides for the inflammatory mechanisms. Of the mechanisms I just mentioned, again, there's quite a few that butyrate contributes to: motility, visceral perception, and the inflammatory mediators account for the majority of symptoms that patients in these populations will describe. And 2FL supports all of these functions. This is also a plug for the use of a probiotic with bifido strains, right? I mentioned that bifido is capable of consuming HMOs, but there's specific strains that can act on 2FL only. So a probiotic used in conjunction with this medical food would be really a perfect pairing to maximize that metabolism of 2FL. Okay, and there's more. HMOs are amazing. So believe it or not, they are natural antibiotics since they act as decoys. So in the figure, we can start on the left. You can see that a pathogen, is binding to a receptor on the surface of the intestinal cell. So in this case, once inside the enterocyte, it will multiply and infect. In figure B, the HMO has bound to the pathogen, and it's really just blocked its ability to bind to the receptor. So if we're thinking about patient populations here, in addition to those I previously mentioned, at the top of my list, I'd be thinking about those who need more immune support. Maybe the goal is just to support those IgA mucous membranes for patients, or perhaps individuals who have mood disorders, since so many neurotransmitters are made or synthesized in the gut, Ultra GI Replenish would be a perfect formula to trial in them. So again, this formula was tested in a single arm open label study. And this is just a brief overview of the study design. It's 12 patients. They were recruited by their functional medicine practitioner. They took 2 servings per day of the of the Ultra GI Replenish for 6 weeks. And they were to fill out gastro quality of life index questionnaires before at baseline and then at week 6. At baseline in week 6, also a stool sample was taken, and I will show you essentially what was found in these patients. So the gastrointestinal quality of life index questionnaire has over 30 questions, and they pertain to GI symptoms, emotional function, social function, and physical function. So a higher score on the questionnaire would translate to better quality of life overall for that individual, or fewer symptoms for the individual. So participants demonstrated a statistically significant improvement in total score in GI symptoms and social function. The physical and emotional function areas of the questionnaire, there was also improvement noted, but it did not reach statistical significance. I think worth noting here really though is the GI symptoms, of course, right? There was improvement in 6 weeks. I know some of you are probably thinking, well, it wasn't trialed long enough, or there's only 12 patients that this was trialed in. But, again, we have to understand how these patients feel. I give the example again of the patient, maybe a high school student who's missing a lot of school, might have to be homeschooled. Sometimes their nutritional status of just deficiencies, iron alone, they might not have enough iron, and it might be so fatigued they can't get out of bed. So to be able to see improvement in only 6 weeks in these patients, meaning they have less frequent and or less severe GI complaints, is actually quite remarkable. Bifidobacteria, this was important to look at in the study since certain patient populations, so we can take those with celiac disease or IBD, they're going to have lower amounts of bifido colonizing their microbiome, right? Many of these patients present with dysbiosis. When we look at bifidobacteria levels in these patients, there was a 19-fold increase overall. With the increase in bifido, again, it's no surprise that short-chain fatty acids and butyrate increased overall as well. 2 species that deserve an honorable mention here were the F. prausnitzii and the Roseberia, as they both increased. These 2 strains are involved in the production of butyrate, specifically from lactate. So again, just another reason why we're using 2FL is, basically give the body 2FL and let the body, metabolize what it needs. Does it need more butyrate? Does it need more short-chain fatty acids? Maybe that individual just needs more bifido. Giving the body the ingredients and letting it decide where it uses those ingredients is something that is very unique to humans. So just fascinating stuff here. So just to quickly recap, improvements in GI symptoms and quality of life, as noted from the questionnaire, but also quantifiable improvements. So big quantifiable improvements measured from stool samples. And the last formula we're going to quickly review, because I noticed we're probably on a time constraint here, is to support those with sarcopenia. Okay, so many of the same ingredients mentioned in previous formulas are useful here, especially the protein profile with branched amino acids and essential amino acids. Leucine in this case would be critical as it regulates protein synthesis in muscle. So leucine contributes to optimal nitrogen retention, and that's going to in turn help build and maintain muscle. There's over 20 essential vitamins and minerals, and that's to address increased need for the nutrients. Vitamin D deficiency in particular, this is common and has been associated with poor physical function, low muscular strength, and increased risk for fractures. And the cocoa polyphenols are really an ingredient specific to this formula. This is one we haven't looked at yet in any other formula. And it has a lot of effects on vascular function. So healthy blood flow is going to ensure the delivery of amino acids and nutrients to the muscle so that we can support protein synthesis and ultimately increase muscle strength and function overall. Let's see. Okay, I'm not sure. Something's happening with my clicker here. Okay, so I'm not able to advance to the next. Oh, there we go. There we go. It's working now all at once. Okay. Okay, let me go back.
It's I just helped you out a little bit, Malisa. Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. Okay, so no problem. Okay, so this diagram really sums up much of what we've chatted about today. We've chatted about a lot, but I think it's really nice to see more and more research focusing on the entire picture, right? So really stepping back, looking at the whole picture, and seeing that multiple factors are contributing to a disease state or diagnosis. So, in life, there's multiple examples where we can look to the future and really see where we want to be and then work backwards from there, right? We take necessary steps to get there. We plan our attack. We can see this when it comes to finances, savings for retirement or perhaps career goals. Recently, I had a discussion with someone close to me, and what was said and what really resonated was that when it comes to health, these same principles of taking the necessary steps now to save for the future could be more difficult to envision. And so medical foods they're another tool to add to your dispensary, in addition to recommending regular exercise, healthy diet, and mental well-being. Medical foods can really add years to life and life to years for patients. So we learned of many ingredients and the mechanisms by which they can reverse pathophysiology, essentially, working a lot in the top of this figure. But let's not forget that medical foods can be used as prevention as well. We can really use medical foods to encourage others to live more in the bottom portion of this diagram. And the last slide is a table that you can go through at your leisure, but the point I want to make here is that within the past year or so, Metagenics has upgraded all the medical food formulas once again. So really taking into account feedback and comments from the practitioners and what practitioners are looking for. So for instance, no more added sugar in any of the formulas. So cane sugar has been removed from all the formulas. Fiber sources have changed amongst the formulas, and sunflower oil has been replaced with olive oil. So lots of changes. You can go through them again at your leisure. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to Metagenics directly. Or if you have a local rep, they'd be happy to help as well. So I hope this information some of you to try medical foods, or if you for some instance stopped using medical foods, I hope it encourages you to try them once again, or give them a shot in yourself, right? Live in the lab and see how they can benefit you. So I'll turn it over to you, Amy, back to you, if there's any questions. And thanks.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation here. We have plenty of questions and we have just a little bit of time. So I'm just going to kind of run through them quickly. Thank you everybody for your questions. We really appreciate it here. And we're so lucky to have Malisa here to answer them live. How fun is that?
Yeah, and whatever we don't get through with questions, we'll be able to answer you after the webinar, right?
Yes, yeah. I will ask Malisa to answer them, and then I'll be sending them to the individual question answers, the question askers, excuse me. So the first question that I have is, what probiotic from Metagenics would include the bifidobacteria strains?
Yeah, so we have a few probiotics in particular that would have the bifidolactis and bifidolongum, which would be specific for acting on the 2FL. If I had to recommend one, it would be Ultraflora Biome Pro. And that is because it not only contains bifido, but it contains additional probiotic strains that you would have to buy essentially 4 individual probiotics from Metagenics to equal that one. So it's probably the best bang for the buck.
Excellent, excellent. So Sarah asks, is there an Ultra GI Replenish appropriate for patients with histamine intolerance?
Perfect. Yeah, that was actually, it's usually on my list of examples to give for patient population. So any histamine that's present there are like allergy-mediated immune responses, for sure.
Excellent. Julia asks, do you have a medical food that is safe? Okay, well, actually, it's the same exact question that just asked, so we're going to skip that one. Julia also asked, do you suggest any of the medical foods for pregnant women?
Yeah, so, like most supplements, it's just not ethical to test these during pregnancy or nursing or when moms are nursing. So I think you just have to use your clinical judgment at this point, right? So, given all the ingredients I've shared with you, I think that the only thing I didn't mention was that one of the definitions of the medical foods is that any ingredient that is in the medical food has to be listed as or generally regarded as safe, which is a list the FDA puts out. So if they change their list, then Metagenics has to change their ingredients. So with that being said, most of all the ingredients are very safe. Together as a macro-micronutrient combination, it is like a food, right? Which is why it's called medical food. I would personally not have a problem using this in pregnant women. Just realize that, there might not be enough protein in there as, just alone, right? They still have to eat food in addition to this to get their counts because they're pregnant, but it should be fine.
Excellent. And Zeal asks, which formula is for patients wanting to gain weight?
Interesting. So there's a few. So, ultra glucose control would be a good example of this, right? Because if we're not keeping our glucose, our blood sugar stable, we're going to keep dipping into what's stored to come out and to use that as fuel. So ultra glucose control would be a really good one. Ultra GI Replenish is going to just keep our gut health happy. And again, we saw anything from there as a domino effect is going to obviously impact weight. But again, these are not going to replace food, right? They're just to help nutritionally manage. So probably one of those formulas in combination with a healthy diet.
Excellent. Debbie asks, what does CGM absorption compare with that of nanocurcumin formulations?
Great question. Off the top of my head, I don't know. I know that the information we presented is one of the only studies that's actually run in humans. So I'm not sure if nanocurcumin preps are. So I'd have to look into that further.
Okay, excellent. I'll include that in the follow-ups. So, excuse me. Lori asks, with the use of ultra glucose control, do you have to worry about hypoglycemia, especially in those patients prone to this?
So the idea is that You don't. We're trying to move patients away from that, right? Because typically that hypoglycemia is the result of some kind of reactive hypoglycemia. It's a yo-yo effect, right? That individual is waiting too long to eat, right? Big periods of time between meals, or when they do eat, it's going to be a simple carbohydrate. So something that's going to spike their glucose and then it drops really drastically. And we saw that with glucerna, right? We saw that with glucerna and then oatmeal. So when it drops really low, then that's going to stimulate the body again for another response. So the idea with ultra glucose control is to really keep that response confined to a really constant level and a level that's not going to spike insulin as much. So we're hoping to move away from hypoglycemia with the use of it.
Excellent. Amanda asks, are there HMOs actually from human milk or are they recreated somehow in a lab?
Yeah, they are recreated somehow. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Nancy asks, would there be the vanilla version of the product then be lacking in polyphenols?
Can you repeat that one more time? Would there be a vanilla version lacking in polyphenols?
Correct.
For Ultrameal Cardio 360? They're added. I'm not sure I understand the question. So the reticol is added to the formula, the polyphenols. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Sorry about that. My voice cut out a little bit. Okay, so Martha asks, what side effects have been associated with these products?
Yeah, so there hasn't really been any, right? And I think that we need to maybe step back and really determine if it's a side effect or is it a reaction. I don't really love those words, to be honest, right? Because if we're getting some kind of response in the individual, it's not always a negative response, right? Mm-hmm. It might be some kind of healing crisis, but I don't think it should alarm us to stop the formula. Maybe just, again, go a little bit slower, low and slow in these individuals. But again, the note that these are complete profiles, so macro micronutrient profiles. So typically we're not really seeing, that much of a response come from individuals. If you are, I would say just drop down the dose, start at 1 scoop versus 2 or even a half a scoop and work that individual up. Yeah.
Excellent. Tamara asks, can the probiotics cause irritation in those with bovine protein sensitivity?
With bovine protein sensitivity? No, they should not. So again, these are human strain, but typically they are, recreated in the lab. So there should be no effects with that, right? Because that's going to be a protein that would cause that kind of sensitivity or reaction, whatever we want to call it, intolerance in those individuals. Yeah.
Excellent. And I know we talked about a number of products, but Donna is asking, how are they dosed? Are they meal replacements or in addition to, and how many times a day?
Yeah. Okay. So they are often used as meal replacements, but that is not what they've been formulated for. They've been formulated for in the addition of like a diet intervention. Typically what we see in the research studies when we're treating the disease state or condition, focus for that medical food, it's usually 2 doses per day, which ends up being 4 scoops. So 1 dose is 2 scoops per day. But again, you can definitely get some really good results just doing like the 1 serving a day. Was there a piece of that question I missed? Because there was a couple components there. How are they dosed?
How are they dosed? And they're not meal replacements. They're in addition to, and then how many times a day?
And then the only other comment I will make is that often individuals who start taking medical foods, they don't want to come off. They either feel like they really love them, or chances are these patients are not having enough, food per day. They're not even getting a high enough caloric intake. So this is really easy for them to incorporate as a daily routine. So no need to take them off. They're getting so much nutritional supplementation from the medical foods, right? So often long term they want to stay on. And again, you don't have to do that at 2 scoops per day. You can do that 1 scoop per day. If you think someone might benefit from ultra glucose control and ultra GI replenish at the same time, do 1 scoop of each. And then just another tidbit is, Metagenics has shaker cups that are 4 ounces. So often, maybe elderly patients that this would be really useful for. When you show them an 8-ounce cup, it could be a little daunting. So when they see a 4-ounce cup, they're like, you know what, I could do that. I can work with that. I can get it down. You can try adding this to food, make popsicles, maybe in the summertime. This is really good for individuals who have some kind of mechanical issue in their mouth too, right? Because they're still getting nutrition, but they're not sore, with their teeth. So a lot of options you can use this for.
This is just something that I thought of, but can you add it to a simple smoothie maybe?
Totally.
Something
That's exactly. And all these, I love when you ask questions because it stimulates, my brain to say things. But all of these medical foods come with program guides. So if you're new to them, it will give you some examples of how to dose them, but also recipes, and that's what's included are a lot of smoothie recipes.
Super helpful. Can you comment on the high carb content for ultra glucose control?
Love to. Yeah. So it's 22 grams, and it's usually a question that comes up because, historically, when we think of treating patients with diabetes or some kind of insulin resistance, we want to cut the carb count down because we don't want to spike the insulin. But remember, this is a complex carbohydrate. It's heat moisture treated. It's going to be almost completely absorbed and very slow digesting. So 15 grams of that is the UCAN, and then there's added fiber that make it this meta release complex is what we call it. But I think we need to shift away from thinking about the response we're going to get by the insulin response we're going to get, and really just think about how it acts in the body. It's very slow digesting, and it only, if anything, minimally stimulates insulin.
Excellent. So we'll just take a little time for a couple more questions, and we're almost finished. Anybody that needs to leave, please feel free. We'll be sending a recording after. Via email. So Cassie asks, will these products trigger flare-ups in HSV patients?
Yeah. So again, I don't really love that word flare-up. So, when we think of someone who has a flare-up, quote unquote, what we need to think about is the glass is overflowing, right? So all those factors that contribute to, what puts them over the edge, that medical food might have just been, the last straw that broke the camel's back. Again, maybe it's just because of how many contributing factors they have. 2 scoops is not necessary for them. Let's start at 1 scoop. So short answer is yes, it's possible. Long answer is don't be scared about it, right? It's okay that happened. It's trial and error. Just back off a little bit, do 1 scoop, because it's not the medical food. It's all the contributing factors, together that the glass overflows.
Makes sense. Excellent. Lauren asks, what medical food would you recommend to a patient undergoing jaw surgery who would have to be on a liquid diet for 4 to 6 weeks?
Yeah, I don't know. Choose any which one of them. So, I would maybe choose a combination of a few. Chances are there's probably some other underlying things that have nothing to do with the jaw surgery that you can work on for that patient. I think ultra glucose control is nice because, again, it does have a little bit higher of a carb content, and will keep them stable for long periods of time because they're not going to want to eat, as often. Because of their jaw surgery. But also Ultra Inflamx 360 would be really great because of the natural immune initiation response, inflammatory response to just surgery alone, right? We get the swelling, the right, we get the neutrophils that are going to infiltrate. So we just support the immune system and the inflammation pathways and push them towards healing.
Excellent. And just one more here. Steve asks, can you please explain the difference between whey and rice protein powders?
Yeah, so I love this question. So essentially what Metagenics was looking at when they created this macro nutrient profile for protein is from the protein, the amino acids, how can we get as close to whey or eggs as possible, right? Because whey and eggs is almost 100% complete protein profile. And so the combination of the pea and rice together get us as close as we can to one, essentially. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So I'm just going to wrap everything up here and say thank you so much to everybody who attended today. And thank you so much, Malisa, for this great presentation. Everyone look out in their email for a link to view this recording, as well as a special offer for Metagenics. Anyone who has any additional questions can email them to me at amy.regan, R-E-G-A-N, @fullscript.com. I hope everyone enjoyed the presentation. And Malisa, any closing thoughts or just kind of thoughts that you had during the event today?
No, just once again, those are awesome questions. Again, I know I bombarded you with information, but I really hope that, some of you just take the plunge if you're new to medical foods and give them a shot. I think you're going to be really surprised at the clinical outcomes you're going to see and how quickly you'll see them.